new report out from the Senate, who has been working on this report, I guess, for a couple of years, on the FBI's behavior in investigating the credible charges or accusations of Brett Kavanaugh being sexual assault. There were two women. We heard from one,
Blasey Ford.
Blasey Ford, who testified at the Kavanaugh's hearing. There was a second woman who I believe knew him at Yale. And apparently there were a lot of other tips. But the White House was responsible for telling the FBI, do not investigate the question of his sexual assault charges. Now, I also imagine there may have been other areas where they said, do not investigate. We still never found out who paid off his mysterious, and I say mysterious,
ticket debt?
Because the huge baseball ticket debt in and of itself was weird, right? I mean, like, you're a sports junkie, but you're racking up that kind of debt on baseball tickets. Something's weird about that.
Right. I mean, this isn't some guy that's, making minimum wage and maybe has a bit of a gambling problem or an addiction to sports. This guy is somebody who, I guess, in theory, had some right-wing benefactors. We know that Clarence Thomas did. That could be something that if we had an administration that wasn't fully in the tank for Brett Kavanaugh, that we could have looked into.
Well, wasn't that looked into under like a private Senate hearing or something like that? I forget. I think that was one of the things that was kept behind closed doors.
There was something talked about there, and the question was like, who paid off that debt? But also, I don't know how much attention the idea of the debt itself. Like, that just sounds to me like a weird thing to have debt. And you wonder, all I can tell you this is one of the concerns that people have about, Donald Trump's watch deal. Have we talked about this? Mm-hmm. Trump is selling these watches, these Trump watches that are supposed to be high end. He's doing like the sale of he's selling some that are like $500, but he's also selling 147 of them that are $100,000.
And some watch experts have looked into it, like collectors and people who buy them as investments, and they've basically said this is the most insane ripoff you could imagine.
Haters.
They'll say things like, made in Switzerland or parts made in Switzerland, and you look it up, and yes, some of the parts are, but then they're sent to China to be assembled, and a majority of the most...
You're playing the game called capitalism.
...lucrative parts of these watches are manufactured in China. I mean, that matters for collectors for watches as things that appreciate watches. In value.
They're crappy watches.
But a fancy watch would not be a bad investment, but this is because it appreciates in value if it's rare or whatever. But Trump is literally just doing it to scam people because the value of the watch is like... just a few $100s. What? No.
No.
No, what?
This is my point. Because the watches are garbage. But if I have the ability to buy 147 watches at $100,000, I have the ability to put $14 million into Trump's pocket or campaign, let's say. And I may not want a watch. I may not care about the watch. I just want to figure out a way of getting money to them.
Oh, you're the guy who bought those watches?
I'm just saying that, and this is the same thing with the digital cards, right? It's just like a simple way, like, here's an excuse to give me money.
Right.
And I just think there's something fishy about just having that kind of baseball debt.
It becomes a currency, maybe?
Yes.
It becomes a currency. It becomes some other way of transferring money. It becomes some other way of hiding other debts. Who knows? But here's the point. We can't know because the FBI was prevented from doing the sexual assault investigation, and I would bet my bottom dollar on every other investigation. There's no reason to believe that the White House didn't just say, you can investigate this, like, did he cheat at squash? That's it. And, go to town on that. And so the reason why this becomes more relevant, or at least worth noting, is because this report came out from the Senate this week. But also there's this growing talking point on the right because they realize in the run up to the election that one of the things that's going to be driving the turnout and the vote this year is the overturning of Roe v. Wade. And so you have a guy who was credibly accused of committing sexual assault, we were told investigated by the FBI about it, but was not. Voting to get rid of an individual right that more or less half our population needed to protect their bodily autonomy. And so the right wing's sort of freaking out about it, and they're really going deep to try and figure out how to push back on this. Here is Sean Hannity addressing the question as to whether our government imposes some type of restrictions on men that are not imposed on women. And incidentally, I just should say this right up front. It's 2024.
She sits down with the host of this Call Me Daddy podcast. And, what's interesting about this is she says, well, there are no laws that make a decision for a man's body. I want you to listen to this, and then ask yourself, well, wait a minute. Are there laws that the government can make a decision for a man's body? I'll tell you on the other side.
I want to take a moment, and can we try to think of any law that gives the government the power?
This is important. I'm sure you've talked about this, Emma. I don't know if you talked about it in the past day or two, this podcast, right? I mean, this is a host that came off sort of a right-wing platform.
Barstool. They still do her merchandising, but she was able to leave, which is good for her.
And she is an apolitical podcaster. She had a big sort of like a disclaimer before she had Harris on. She's also invited Trump on. Trump is never going to answer these questions, though. And the whole "call me daddy" is really like this.
Call her daddy, by the way.
It's called "Call Her Daddy."
The point is right, but the reason why they say "call me daddy" is because Hannity's trying to sort of like, this is titillating for his
100%.
Old
even that
man
title,
audience.
Yeah.
Well,
yes.
but it's called that. It was originated in the Barstool universe to be a play on "Call Me Daddy," and he's either subconsciously not getting it right because he's
or doesn't feel comfortable,
a horny weirdo, or he's just trying to signal what you're saying to his audience. I mean, this is his radio show when he's pretty lazy, so it's hard to discern.
All right, let's keep playing.
And can we try to think of any law that gives the government the power to make a decision?
I know what you're going to ask.
About a man's body.
Giggles.
No.
Is there any law?
No.
Linda, what would you call the draft? Would that be a decision the government makes if they draft young men? And I don't want them to draft women. And I don't know if that's been a big issue.
I would say, just against all human beings. I mean, think of all of our amazing military that lost their jobs after some of them had 30 and 40-year tenures in the military during the COVID vaccines and the mandates. I mean, that was against all human beings, male and female.
Well, they're making decisions over people's bodies all the time. And then, if you're going to send a guy into a war zone, if God forbid there's a war, men are going to be drafted and they're going to be told to put their bodies in harm's way. And the idea that abortion is this big issue, they're just lying about that too.
Wait, what?
There's just lying about that too.
So the COVID mandate, that's not really the point they're making about a gender specific against male
Although the
policy.
COVID mandate would be a little bit more current if you want to make a reference to bodily autonomy, because check the facts on the internet.
But the whole point is
1973 was when we ended the draft, which was also the same year, by the way, that Roe v. Wade, the decision was handed down, just coincidentally. So he's really reaching back into the past here to find some law that has to do with men's bodies.
Also, men wrote the law that did the draft, so not exactly analogous.
Pretty exclusively, and like this is something you often you're seeing the Trump campaign and Republicans right now really borrow from talking points we've heard in the manosphere many times. The draft thing is consistently what incels and manosphere men's rights podcasts and activists talk about as the thing that is the major discrimination between men and women in our government. And again, you can't, like, we're going back to a law that has been defunct since 1973. Yep.
Indeed. Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.